All right, everybody, I am back again. Oh, 1 second. I got to check my settings once more. Yeah, everything looks fine to me. All righty, let's get going. What's up, everybody? We're waiting to see who's going to get the Lance loot. So we'll see who comments first. Today, I was thinking of taking a break from going through the Sam Harris and Alex O'Connor discussion and reviewing a different video. It's still just more meta ethics. This is MetaMonday. So Supercritical Snake is here at the 1,000 Lance loot. Good job. Who else do we have getting the Lance loot? And we've been working out the exchange rate with Nathan Snickles. So we'll get that sorted. Well, it's my channel. I'll do what I want. So let's review the new video. So this just came out, let's see, 2 days ago. So this is a fairly new one. Julio Hernandez says it's Meta Monday. Yeah, I haven't done a Meta Monday in 3 weeks. I think I did a couple on Mondays, but they were continuation, so I didn't like put that in the title. But I'm trying to be reasonably consistent. As you can see, I did a move. I've had different backgrounds. Now I finally have a semi-official background. I still have to get stuff for the shelf. If you got recommendations, I just don't want to put books on there. All right. So this is a video that I think there's going to be future parts to this video where they talk about AI, but for this one, they just focused on meta ethics. And I did do a discussion with Eric Sampson before. I may or may not have reviewed Eric Sampson videos. Eric Sampson is a moral realist, and I believe he's a non-naturalist realist. So I already listened to this video, and it's going to be a lot of the same sorts of objections that I raised to meta ethics in other cases, but here maybe they're in condensed form, and maybe I'll have something fresh to say. So if you've seen a lot of my meta ethics stuff before, there might be nothing new here. Maybe that's a reason the Alex and Sam video is a little different, because it's different stuff. But hey, let's give it a shot. And if it just seems like it's covering too much of the same ground, I'll switch over to another video. All right.
And why is moral realism an attractive position?
There are many reasons. I mean, one, if you want to capture moral realism sort of in a nutshell, the idea is that moral truths are not invented, but they're instead discovered. That is that they're in many ways like the mathematical truths or like the physical truths. Those are things that we don't make up. Your math professor that you had in college, they weren't just creating mathematical truths. They were out there discovering them, and it wasn't because they were doing empirical investigation. Instead, they were using their mind. They were using reason to come to know these abstract truths that are independent of their mind.
Right out of the gate, there's already something that I find, at the very least, underdeveloped. So this dichotomy between created or discovered. Are the rules of math? Can we cleanly state whether they are created or discovered? Think of something like the game of chess, and think about new moves, new openings, new developments in chess that have occurred over the past few decades, or as chess has proceeded, people have learned new things. Have people made discoveries in chess in a certain sense? Yeah. People that have played a lot of chess, know chess very well, they make discoveries. Nevertheless, chess is a game that we invented. We created it. And personally, I don't see math as being fundamentally different than the rules of chess. It's different in certain sorts of respects, like practical respects. So math is a lot more useful for many everyday practical endeavors, but I see math as simultaneously both constructed and consistent with there being discoveries that one makes within a constructed system. As far as how and why it's constructed, again, as far as the development of mathematics, I would take an empirical approach to it. So this seems to start with a presumption that one couldn't be a thoroughgoing empiricist about mathematics, and I don't see any reason to grant that presumption. So there's a sense in which I think math is discovered and a sense in which I think it's constructed. I don't think that those are inconsistent with one another. And so that dichotomy, I think, is not a particularly helpful one. It's not very illuminating. And I also just don't grant that mathematics is something that we discover in the way that Eric here seems to be implying. So I certainly think people reason, But for me, reason is not some sort of autonomous capacity or employ some faculty independent of empiricist considerations. I don't see there being this sort of a non-empirical intellectual faculty. So I just don't buy into something like that from the outset. I don't think we're going to get arguments for that. So it could just be that Eric is intending to express his position here. I would worry if someone is expressing their position that it's not clear that it's a position that is a potential matter of contention. So, I mean, I guess I would probably just do the same. So maybe it's not that big of a deal. Anyway, Julio, you get 500. Lance Lute, and it stands to reason, gets 250. So Julio says axioms and logical relations are invented, the consequences are discovered. Yeah, exactly. So we could pick any set of axioms or rules we want and then see what follows from them. We could extrapolate from them. And some rules and some systems of math turned out to have applications, whether it's like helping and assist developing other systems of math or helping to describe features of the world. You know, so they're in that sense constructed. And then we make discoveries given some initial set of rules. You can make discoveries in Monopoly. You can make discoveries in Magic the Gathering. People discover new combos in Magic the Gathering. Does that mean Magic the Gathering, like it's not constructed? Of course it's constructed. So I don't think that difference is a very helpful one. All right.
And more realists say morality is just like that. So we could be wrong about it. Whole societies could be wrong about it. And that means that some societies can be better than others because they better approximate the moral truths that are independent of our minds. That's, uncomfortable for some people to hear and think about, but it's true. And we should be honest about that. And it's important that we try to shape our societies as best we can. And if there's going to be super intelligence or artificial intelligence, it's important that we get it to align with the moral truths that are independent of our minds. That means we need to be careful about discovering what that truth is. Of course, not overconfident that we have it, but confident that it's there to be found.
All right. So already another concern here. Note that he says like we need to be honest about that. Something similar that Sam Harris will say. This is another type of phrasing that I don't like when people employ this. I mean, imagine I'm laying out my anti-realist position about morality, and I say, anti-realism is something that we need to be honest about. We need to be honest about the fact that there are no stance-independent moral facts. Note the implication that if someone's like, wait, but I don't agree with that. Oh, so you're not being honest? So when you say we got to be honest, and honesty means endorsing the position that's being expressed, it's not merely suggesting that rival positions are false, but that the proponents of them are in some sense not like facing up to the truth. That, there's this truth that we need to accept. It's not the best phrasing for taking. It's just it carries these implications about people that don't accept your view. They're like they're in denial or something like that. And I just don't think that's the best way to phrase these sorts of things.
Okay. Well, great. That's definitely a great introduction to moral realism and its applicability to AI safety. And would you like to give us more of an introduction to yourself, why you got attracted to moral realism, and in broad sweeps, how it might contrast with moral anti-realism?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a professor of philosophy at Purdue University in Indiana in the United States, and I work on metaethics, which is the sort of broad abstract questions about the nature of ethics, whether there is any such thing as what we morally ought to do. And if so, how can we come to know about it? And what does it depend on metaphysically? That is, does it depend on our attitudes or God or my attitude, or is it like the mathematical truths independent of our minds? So that's roughly who I write about existential risk and effective altruism and metaethics. So I teach a class here at Purdue on the ethics of data science. So this is a very STEM-heavy school. There's tons of computer scientists here. And so we talk about that. And then I've taught the ethics of AI in the past, where we talk about existential risk and superintelligent artificial intelligence, those sorts of things. So the second part of your question was say more about moralism. Is that, or why?
Yes, that's right.
How I got into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did I get into it? Well, I mean, I think just by arguing about ethics for a long time, arguing about politics, and then sort of having these reflective questions about like, well, what would even make it the case? Like, I have views about this thing. What would make it the case that these views are right or wrong? Is the mere fact that I hold these views and express them, is that sufficient to make them right? I guess on reflection, I think no, that doesn't make them right. So what would make it the case that my views are correct? It seems to me that the only way that my views could be correct is if they match some reality outside of my mind. That the mere fact that I hold these, or that my ideal advisor would suggest these things to me, doesn't seem like it would be the kind of thing to make it weighty enough to be a sort of moral truth. That's sort of how I got interested in arguing about metaethics. If you want to hear more about like the details, I mean, there's a more careful way to describe what moral realism is, and maybe it's worth doing. So, I mean, I typically introduce moral realism by just saying it's the conjunction of three claims, or the sort of combination of three claims. The first is just cognitivism, which is a view about what we're doing when we're making moral claims, saying that this is right or wrong, good or bad. That this is a life worth living, and that's a worthless life. The life of a grass counter, the person who counts grass all day, and maybe they enjoy it. I want to say that's a worthless life, even if they enjoy it. So what am I doing when I'm making those sorts of judgments? I'm expressing beliefs. I'm trying to represent reality independent of my mind. That contrasts with non-cognitivism, according to which what we're doing when we're making moral claims is just expressing our attitudes. We're saying boo or yay, or maybe we're saying, when we say that something's morally wrong, we're saying don't murder. If we say murder's wrong. Some non-cognitivists who say we're not trying to represent reality say we're just issuing commands or something like that. So that's cognitivism. All moral realists endorse that. The other one.
Yeah, see, do all moral realists endorse that, or do they need to? I just found it puzzling that moral realism is depicted as this conjunction of claims that you need cognitivism. What if you think there stands independent moral facts, but you're not a cognitivist? Like, you don't think that's what people mean when they make moral claims. Why couldn't you think that there stands independent moral facts anyway? Is that somehow impossible? Yeah, I mean, do facts about how the contingent features of how humans happen to speak, somehow they must align with metaphysical considerations, or else the metaphysical truths couldn't be what they are? So, like, what if we convince people over, or let's just put it this way. Let's suppose we went out and we did a bunch of research and we discovered, actually, it turns out ordinary speakers are non-cognitivists. Would Eric Sampson become a moral anti-realist because people are moral non-cognitivists? If so, why? Why would you stop thinking that there stands independent moral facts just because of facts about how, I don't know, English speakers happen to talk? That seems very strange. I've always found the relationship that philosophers have between language and metaphysics to be a very, very strange one. It's unclear to me why cognitivism is necessary. It seems to me, all a realist really needs is to say there stands independent moral facts. As long as there's at least one of those, boom, you got realism. I don't know why you need these semantic rule features. I don't know why you need these epistemic features. You might believe in them, but why aren't those like icing on the cake? You could still have the cake without all this icing. It's strange.
One is non-nihilism. The other component of moral realism is non-nihilism. That's the view that there are moral truths to be known. So there are nihilists out there, people who think that there's no such thing as what you morally ought to do. There's no such thing as a right and wrong. Of course, we talk that way, but we're just mistaken. So nihilists hold the attitude towards morality that atheists hold towards God. It's true that people devote their whole lives.
I don't like the use of nihilism in place of error theory either, because nihilism often contains this normatively loaded connotations about the values or attitudes of the person in question. So a person that simply says there are no stance independent moral facts, calling him a nihilist, probably not the best terminological decision to make, because it just carries too many negative connotations.
To God, but the atheist just says, yeah, there's nobody there. There's a big nothing that's responding to their prayers and things like that. And similarly, the nihilists about morality say, yeah, people devote their whole lives to the moral causes. There's nothing corresponding to their commitments. There's nothing that makes their commitments the right commitments to have, because there's no such thing as moral reality. So realists deny that. So they think there is a moral reality to be known. And then the third component is stance independence. That is, more realists think that there are truths out there to be known. We can talk about them and say true things about them, and they're made true independent of our attitudes. So As I said earlier, the moral truths are like the physical truths. They, if the world is, if the
it's a pretty standard definition. So you got cognitivism, non-nihilism, and the facts in question are stance independent. I thought, well, I don't know. I watched this, but I guess I didn't remember. Often realists will include an epistemic condition, like we can know at least some of the facts too.
Planet is spherical. That's true whether anybody believes it or not. Even if the whole world thought it was flat, it would still be spherical. People could be wrong. The truth about the shape of the earth is stance independent. It doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes or what they think or believe. And that contrasts with a view according to which morality is in some ways made up by us. And if it were, it would be sort of like, the days of the week. So I think today's a Wednesday, at least where I'm at, is veering on Thursday. So what makes it Thursday right now? Well, it's just our agreement that it's Thursday. There's no such thing as Thursdays written into the nature of the universe. And some people think, yeah, morality is like that. It is if there are any moral truths at all, they're the product of our agreement or the product of the reaction of some hypothetical creature like the ideal observer or myself under ideal conditions. But in any case, there's no stance independent truth about this. It depends on someone's attitudes, either mine or my culture's or an ideal observer. But someone say so at the end of the day settles what the moral truths are, and realists deny that. So realists are cognitivists. They think we're trying to represent the world. There's a world to be represented. There's a world that we can know. And it doesn't depend on our attitudes. That's roughly what realism is.
All right. MoxDC says, isn't Richard Brown sympathetic to sort of non-cognitive realism? I don't know what Richard Brown's meta-ethical views are. I know we had a discussion. Unfortunately, it remains unclear to me. It looked like some sort of Kantian position was being presented.
You've brought up ideal agents and ideal observers. I think that they're two different things. You may be using them in a similar way as each other. I'm not sure. But okay, so ideal observers are kind of like this omnipotent being that sort of knows everything about everything and is, I guess, not biased to any particular one sort of agent. It's yeah. But ideal agents are kind of like an ideal observers, but very focus on one person's point of view. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So there was a view in metaethics that was popular for just a little bit. It was advanced by a guy named Roderick Firth called the ideal observer view. And basically what he said is, right, what makes it the case that an action is right or wrong? Well, it's an action is right if an ideal observer would approve it, and it's wrong if an ideal observer would disapprove of it. And what's an ideal observer? It's someone, as you say, who doesn't have a special interest in anyone's plight. And instead, they're just sort of observing the world from the point of view of the universe, and their reactions make it the case that actions are right or wrong. And you might wonder, like, why would anyone think that? And the idea is, well, Firth was convinced there is such a thing as right or wrong. And what could make it the case? Well, someone who is just fully acquainted with all the non-moral facts and is acquainted with how it affects everyone, the way that they would react seems like it would settle these truths. And it would be in a non-mysterious way. So you might wonder, like, what is right and wrong? And he said, oh, rightness and wrongness just is the reactions of this ideal observer. And that's in some ways non-mysterious. In some ways, it's totally mysterious. Like, is there such a being? No, probably not. And I don't think Firth thought there was, but I think he thought whatever their reactions would be, that would settle what rightness and wrongness. So that's what an ideal observer is. But some people think, no, what you ought to do doesn't depend on that. It depends on what you would do if you were ideal. So many of us are non-ideal in many ways. We, of course, we have preferences and we have things that we want to do with our life, but many of our preferences and our desires are ill-informed. That is, we think that, or we desire certain things.
Not really sure we need to get into like the difference between an ideal observer and an agent, so I'm going to skip ahead.
Change dramatically, and if you were to be in a relationship with them, it would end up terribly. So you're has come to them and grabbing at their money, and their relationships are destroyed. Many people have that kind of desire, but they're just wrong to. So the ideal agent view is supposed to say, no, what intentions and our goals are incoherent, and we're not always aware of that because we're just mishmash of lots of desires and hopes and dreams, and we don't see the ways that they're incompatible. So our ideal observer, our ideal selves, they would be aware of those things. And so what they would advise us to do, that settles the facts about how you ought to act. That's what an ideal agent or an ideal advisor is like. So
I don't buy into these theories. And one reason that I don't, and I don't think Eric does either, probably for different reasons, but at least one concern I would have is that I don't think there's any determinate fact of the matter about what an ideal agent or an ideal observer would want, or how they. So let's say, as he points out, and I think quite correctly, people are a mishmash of conflicting desires, or desires may exist in some sort of hierarchy where some desires are stronger than other desires. They may conflict. People are full of contradictions. Now, the ideal might be, okay, well, an ideally rational, fully informed version of yourself, some sort of optimized agent that is a you plus, like a you that got cybernetic implants and to make itself super smart and could reason through everything. That they would sort this out, and then there would be some fact of the matter about what they would end up favoring, and then that's what you ought to do. I don't think there's any determinate fact in the matter. So there could be conflicts that there's no fact of the matter about what the sort of rational or correct solution to them would be. It would depend on contingent features of the way that that agent opted to resolve them, for which there's no like specific singular way that you would do it. Kind of, you could imagine like what the idea, let's say you have an equal preference for going on vacation in one or two locations. Or there's just no fact of the matter about it would depend on local proximal conditions, like your mood at the time, or local like weather conditions. Okay, so which vacation would you prefer? There's not a fact of the matter that is contingent on what you would do if you're fully informed and ideally rational. Like that, oh, okay, so the vacation I should go on now is what I would go on under some optimized set of circumstances in this context. Like a lot of it is operating on the assumption that there is some singular determinate fact of the matter about what decisions you would make under some idealized set of psychological conditions. But I think at least part of the ways in which we go about making decisions are socially and contextually embedded in the situations that we're in. So it just doesn't really make sense to wonder what some other agent would do under those circumstances, because that would fundamentally change the nature of the circumstances. So I don't even think these situations make a whole lot of sense. I don't think they have determinate solutions. Never mind the epistemic problems, like how would we even know what an ideal agent would actually want? I don't think we're in a position to actually figure that out in the first place. So this is a non-actionable theory. But even if someone says, okay, well, maybe you could crudely approximate it, I doubt that we have the simulation capacities to do that sort of thing in a meaningful way. And I doubt that there's some fact of the matter. Like if you were fully informed and ideally rational, what job would you prefer? Well, how different would you have to be fully informed and ideally rational? What psychological changes would you undergo? What would that entail? I don't even know if people can imagine that sort of thing and actually simulate that in their minds in a meaningful way and actually make inferences on the basis of what they're allegedly imagining. But even supposing that you could try to imagine some sort of being, is there some specific job that the perfect version of you would want? Is there? I'm not sure that there is. So why would I operate on the assumption that there would be? Maybe there are a dozen different versions of you for which there's no determinate fact which one that's fully informed and being perfectly, at least not irrational. They're all equally rational. Maybe they would prefer different ones. And how would you pick between those based on what standard? Because if the idea is you should do whatever that being would do, but there's a bunch of different possible candidates, how do you sort that out? Maybe you don't. So I'm not really sure why people would think that there's this like singular thing that the perfect version of you would favor. Maybe there just isn't. Yeah, stands to reason says ideal observer is just an intuition pump. Yeah, this is something that I really worry about, though, which is that philosophers often take themselves to have these imaginative or simulation capacities to consider counterfactual considerations or hypothetical circumstances that would turn on potentially, for instance, empirical considerations that we just don't have access to. So, Mary's room is a good example of this. What would it really take for a person to be, perfectly knowledgeable of all non-experiential or qualitative aspects of the color red? Would they have to have a brain the size of the Milky Way? I don't know. But maybe. So what we're imagining is probably something that it could be very much unlike the reality that we would need to imagine in order to really think about the scenario appropriately, such that, because it's a thought experiment. You're supposed to run the experiment in your mind. Imagine a person met these conditions and didn't meet these other conditions. And so what are you imagining when you do that? Are you actually correctly simulating a counterfactual in which this scenario is occurring? I very much doubt it. So what are you drawing on when you're approximating that scenario, and how close do you approach it? I suspect the answer is it's unclear what you're actually doing psychologically. People are probably doing different things from one another, and you're probably very far from simulating what that would actually be like. What it would actually be like is it partially contingent on empirical questions that we don't know the answers to. So how the hell are people supposed to imagine this? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's kind of like imagine a certain type of propulsion that we haven't invented yet. And if you had that type of propulsion, how fast would the spaceship go? How the hell would you know? You don't know what the type of propulsion is. So how would you be able to answer the question? So, philosophers will often give themselves the tasks of imagining things that I just don't think they can imagine. I think they imagine they can imagine it. Doesn't mean they can actually imagine it. And there's questions about like what it would mean for them to imagine it. What are they doing when they're imagining it? And how do they know what they're doing? And how do they know if they think they're doing the same thing as one another, that they're actually doing the same thing as one another and not just doing different things and calling it the same thing? It's not like philosophers like deeply explored the cognitive processes involved in standard philosophical reasoning and have charted it out and mapped it out and know that they're all doing more or less the same thing. They don't know that. And they don't, basically a lot of psychology is relying on, they're sort of flying by the seat of their psychological pants. They don't actually know what they're doing psychologically. And they often seem to think it doesn't matter. Like as long as you slap a label onto some claim you make, you could just bypass the need to ground your claims in terms of the specific psychological processes that are allegedly involved or potentially involved in whatever it is you're judging or thinking or saying or doing. All right.
Mm-hmm. But it seems so ideal advisors are very much on the side of the person who they're representing. It's a rather parochial view of the universe. It's limited to whoever the advisor is advising. Advantage and can optimize AI ethics a bit later. And can you give us some examples of epistemic access to these moral facts about the world?
Yeah, so realists are committed to there being, moral properties such as rightness and wrongness, goodness and badness, virtues such as, temperance and courage and wisdom and all those sorts of things. But they're features of the world, so they're properties that actions have. So actions are totally, non-mysterious things, like we go around acting. And the idea is that many of our actions have this extra feature, which is like, a moral property, a rightness or wrongness property. That doesn't mean that there's a thing that like attaches to our actions or anything like that. It's just that they have this property. So now you want to know, like, well, how do we come to, know how do we have epistemic access to these properties that our actions apparently have? Well, at least according to my version of more realism, we come to know it by means of reason, specifically this faculty we have called intuition, that many people.
You already know I'm going to have issues with this. So we come to know what the moral facts are using reasoning, specifically this faculty of intuition. Do we have this faculty? How do we know we have this faculty? How do we determine this? How does it work? What psychological processes are involved? I got so many questions here. If someone said that they had an extra sensory capacity beyond like, taste, smell, sight, touch, sound, not some sort of like proprioception or other sorts of senses that are well established by the sciences, I'd have questions. So what this faculty presumably is non-perceptual. Philosophers that talk about the capacity for seeing moral truth will sometimes use seeing in a seemingly literal sense, and there actually are accounts of moral perception that you perceive the moral facts. That strikes me as just so outrageously implausible that I'm borderline incredulous that anybody would present that as a serious position, but they do. But even if they don't, it's often like you see, and it's in like scare quotes, you see the moral facts. What? Okay, so you're not seeing them literally. What are you doing then? I actually want to know what they're doing when they make these claims. There's something strange about sorry, the confidence of just saying, yeah, this is a faculty that we have. When was this established? Like, if people went around saying they could see auras or they have other sorts of faculties, I don't think we would just grant that. And a lot of times philosophers will say, oh, well, I'm using the same faculty was used for logic or math. Are you using the same faculties? How was that established? Are you using the same psychological processes? And again, if you are, how do you know that? How was that established? Because it's the same phenomenology? Because you use the same language? Like, what did philosophy, like, what work did they do to show that? Like, when they say this, are they saying that they're relying on the same cognitive processes, or do they not care about that and they don't think it's relevant? It's just not clear what this faculty is supposed to be. Because it sounds to me a lot like claiming that one has some sort of extrasensory power. You know, it almost sounds paranormal in terms of how it's supposed to function. And, you know, when I've talked to philosophers about this, I get a variety of different responses. Sometimes it's, or, you know, if I've read what they have to say about the matter, sometimes intuition, it's like, look, no, there's nothing mysterious or weird going on here. It's just ordinary psychological processes. It's just the standard sorts of inferential and non-inferential sorts of judgments that we come to have towards things. Okay, so that's one perspective. I don't know if that's what's being invoked here, or whether is it some sui generis faculty? Are moral intuitions the product of the same faculty as non-moral intuitions about other philosophical topics? What things does this faculty operate over, and what things does it not operate over? And how do we know that? And how is that determined? Like, what standards or criteria do we use to determine that? Is it the phenomenology of it? And if it is the phenomenology of it, when did we establish that people that have moral intuitions have the same phenomenology? How did we determine that? Yeah, like, in the case of different people seeing red, we have some external means of corroborating their sensory experiences. We don't have any external means of corroborating intellectual seemings or intuitive faculties. So what are we doing to actually show that people that are reporting having the same experiences are in fact having the same experiences? Is it their willingness to assent to the same sorts of propositions expressed in English? Because that's not good enough. That's not good enough. If you give two people a pain scale and you say, how much pain are you in? 1 out of 10, and one says a 7 and another says 7, does that guarantee that they're having the same kind of experience or the same severity of experience? Nope. Because language is this foggy window into what's actually going on in the mind, and matching up, synchronizing our speech patterns isn't enough to synchronize or to know or to make confident inferences that our underlying cognitive states are the same or are drawing on the same processes.
People think is like, oh my God, this mysterious thing that, like,
yeah, because it is.
Grabs at the moral truths that are out there. But I mean, I tend to say, like, no, this faculty of intuition is one that you use constantly.
So someone says it's mysterious. No, you use it all the time. So just compare. Okay. So people go around saying they see auras, right? They think that when you look at a person, you can see like little, like the outlines of color, and some people have pink auras or blue auras or green auras. And so you go, hey, that sounds really mysterious. How is it that you could see auras? And they go, hey, everybody can see auras. You see auras all the time. No, I don't. Do I have this faculty of intuition? I'm not sure that I do. A lot of what I get, some of the pushback I get when I question this is people go, how could you even do philosophy? You don't have intuitions. As one knows, everybody uses intuition. So if you claim not to have them, there's something wrong with your brain. No, I'm not granting that, because it's not clear what the hell these are. When did you establish that you have them? And okay, before we even establish it, we have them. What the hell are they? What exactly are they? And what I get are terms like, well, they're how things seem. What the hell does that mean? They're how things seem. Okay, so it seems to me that I'm holding a cup here. Now, if you ask me, like, I don't think that's a primitive concept. So if you said, okay, but what do you mean by seems? I'm like, well, I could see the cup. And then if you ask me more questions, I could still, well, it looks to me like I have like a visual field, and I could talk about how it looks to me. Like I could start talking about my vision and my phenomenology. There'd be a bunch of things to say. I can make various sorts of relational claims. Like I could say, well, when I say it seems to me that the cup is right in front of my face, what I mean by that is that it appears to me visually as though there's objects behind it. And then I could talk about light and how I could see my face on the camera, and I could see my computer screen in front of me, and I could like draw a picture of how things look to me, and add like color it in. So there's all sorts of things I could build on and add to it. But when we talk about things seeming a certain way, and they intellectually seem, I don't have an intellectual sensory organ that's distinctively like intellectual in nature. Like, are intellectual inferences different from judgments like oh, my shoes are over there? Like, is that an intellectual judgment? Or what if I just recall something? So is recalling things from memory, is that intellectual? So if it seems to me George Washington was the first president of the United States, is that an intellectual seeming? Or is memory, like is recall, what a seeming? Which things count as seemings and which things don't? And again, even if philosophers have offered some categorization, what is that based on? Them just asserting it? Like, are these categories based off of, well, you use activation of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex when these judgments are made, but I don't know, activation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex when these judgments are made. Like, is that what we're talking about? Like, is there any effort to map the different sorts of psychological processes onto brain functions or brain mechanism of some kind? Is there any effort to map them onto distinct like cognitive processes from a functional perspective, like what they're for or what they do? Is there? Like, it seems like philosophers are making claims that are like, when you talk about having a faculty of intuitions, well, the faculty seems to be some sort of mental, some sort of cognitive process that you're engaged in. And the intuitions seem to be similar to something like percepts or judgments or memories. They seem like psychological states. So it seems like you're talking about a psychological mechanism that produces certain sorts of psychological output. And yet there seems to be virtually no effort at all to study or explore this process and its outputs from an empirical perspective to actually understand what it is. So it's like if I said I had an extra sensory, I have a sixth sense. But then when you start asking me questions about like, how does it work? What parts of the brain does it involve? Does it involve any specific sensory organs on the body? What sorts of stimuli, external stimuli in the world is it responsive to? I say, no. None of those questions are legitimate. I have this capacity. I can detect truths using my faculty, and it produces outputs. But all those questions about how it functions, that's for the sciencey empirical stuff. That doesn't work for this faculty. So if this faculty of intuition is supposed to be like the sensory capacities, where's the empirical work? If it's not, why should I believe that any philosophers have this faculty? So they have it like it's not physically mediated by any specific processes, but somehow you have it. I'm required to accept that. Why would I be required to accept that? Like, if I take a philosophical stance according to which that's not how brains work, you don't just have non-embodied, non-cognitive, like they're not involved in any, there's no specific cognitive process you could point to. There's nothing empirically to do here. If you're saying that's the kind of process or faculty you've got, I don't think psychological faculties work that way. So I'm certainly not going to buy that. And if it is, okay, then where's the empirical evidence? In other words, you have the same thing I've talked about before, this empiricist dilemma. If it is empirical, show me the empirical data. If it's not empirical, I'm not obligated to buy it from buy that you can do this or have this ability from the outset of inquiry, because that's, among other things, begging the question against an empiricist or against somebody that takes a psychological perspective on the nature of these sorts of faculties, that they are, or at least in a certain sense, must be instantiated in terms of distinct sorts of psychological processes. I don't think a person could exercise a faculty that produces outputs like intuitions, like some sort of judgment or belief or attitude, some other sort of psychological state, but it's not mediated by any recognizable or identifiable psychological processes. So I think either, in other words, to wrap this up, either there are empirical questions here that I don't think philosophers have adequately answered at all, or they're claiming that there are not empirical answers to be had here in the first place, in which case I don't buy that. I don't think that we have faculties that couldn't be explored and studied and understood empirically. I don't think that's a thing. Oh, right.
You may not be aware of it, but whenever you're doing philosophy, when you're considering various claims and their plausibility, when you're considering whether a certain proposition is possibly true or metaphysically necessary or metaphysically impossible, those sorts of things, what you're doing is you're drawing on your intuition. That is, you're considering claims You're considering what it would take for those to be true. You're seeing whether it strikes you as true or false, and you're drawing conclusions on that basis.
See, that stuff like strikes you as true. So things can strike me as true in a sort of non-technical, totally colloquial sense. Like it strikes me as true that like moral realism isn't true, or it depends on the type of moral realism. More like certain forms of moral realism aren't true, something like that. But I don't take myself to like be accessing a special faculty that's truth detecting. That is, to say that it strikes me as true might mean that I'm inclined, I believe that it's true. I find myself currently disposed to think that it's true. There might be some way of cashing it out where I'm not drawing on any distinct special mechanism. It would be standard inferential processes, standard sorts of judgments, standard sorts of attitudes. Like I would just be reporting beliefs I have, levels of confidence that I have. So if something strikes me as true, as far as I could tell, that doesn't seem to me to be psychologically very different from just saying I believe that. What's the difference? So, I'm not sure there's a huge difference between having the intuition that something is true or having some sort of compulsion to believe it or actually believing it, like just basic. So there are instances in which I believe things are true. Like I believe the sun is going to rise tomorrow. Is that an intuition? Seems kind of weird to call it that. So no, I say seems there. So what do I mean when I say seems? Well, I am not inclined to call it that. That is not a judgment I would make. So I could say a bunch of stuff about what I would believe or what I would not believe or how I would use terms or how I would not use terms. And if you said, well, why? I might say, I don't think that's a good way to use the term, or that doesn't strike me as an appropriate way to use the term in this context. And I might be able to unpack that and say more about why I would report it seeming that way or it's striking me that way. All of that language is in a certain sense, in some cases, non-literal, but more generally speaking, it's just words. It's just words that are means of conveying my position on things. None of it is speaking to some sort of special faculty that I have, some sort of special system or mechanism I have for detecting truth. These are all just a variety of ways that I happen to have developed, probably in part from studying philosophy, for expressing what I think about things. I don't see that, I'm not going to bootstrap what I believe by taking my sense that my beliefs, like that they have this special quality, that they strike me as true, as further evidence that they are true. It just, I have my beliefs, and when I think about think about your memories, right? So all my memories aren't salient to me all the time. Someone could say, hey, do you remember that time we went to that place? Oh, no, I don't remember. They tell me, now I remember. So a memory can resurface. And that moment in which it resurfaces, it's almost experienced like it's coming from it's coming from outside my stream of consciousness and it's entering into it. But it's still coming into my stream of consciousness, like from my brain, like from my mind. So whatever had to go on to get those neurons to start firing and go, hey, the memory's over here. Zip, zip, send it into your conscious awareness. And then I become conscious of it. There's a sense in which that can be experienced almost like it was delivered to me. There's this deliverance quality to it because I wasn't conscious of it. I had to put effort into it. And then I became conscious of it. So I could experience that like a discovery. So when it's with a memory, that feels weird. It's like, no, that my brain is tagging, that's a memory. So I'm not discovering something, I'm remembering something. But when it kind of feeds forward and it's not about recall. So, what do I think about that? What do I think about that? And you connect the dots cognitively. So this is my answer to that. That can feel like a discovery because there wasn't the proposition that you're affirming now. There wasn't the proposition. Boom, you put two and two together. Now it's there. Eureka, I got it. And that experience, I think, could be misleading people into thinking that they have this quasi-perceptual capacity for detecting truths out there in the world, almost like they have their intellectual faculties are like antenna that are detecting truths out there, when actually what they're doing is sort of connecting the cognitive dots inside their own mind. And they're discovering things relative to their current set of beliefs, dispositions, attitudes, and so on. So in a certain sense, are they detecting something? Yeah, they're detecting something about their own psychological states. But whether or not those states are telling them anything about the world, that's a separate question. So, a lot of what I think is going on with philosophers reporting these faculties or these senses of where things like they have this special quality where they think they're detecting truths. I think it's a lot of it is just bad phenomenology. I think that they're taking this, maybe in some cases, the sense of discovery, like it feels discovered, it feels like it's coming from the outside. They're taking that at face value, and it's like, yeah, because it is coming from the outside. Just take something like people will often talk about moral realism feeling like it's stance independent, feeling like it's coming from the outside. Well, if I think about that, I feel guilt about that, even if I wanted to do it. And so the guilt is coming from the outside. Like I'm detecting this truth because there are facts about what it seems like it would be wrong to do, even if it was consistent with my desires to do it. So maybe someone desires to steal, and then when they think about stealing, like, yeah, but I'd still feel bad even if I wanted to. So it's got to be wrong independent of my desires. Well, if you grew up in a culture that has strongly discouraged stealing, and there could be parts of your psychology that are like, hey, internalize this guilt feeling if you consider stealing. And then you might have this desire. I really want the new iPhone or whatever, and you have this desire to steal it. And then this psychological system gets, it sets off the tripwire. So we have these social brains that are like, hey, hold on. If you steal that, you're going to feel really guilty about it, and you could get caught. So there's this risk aversion system. And so the systems could, so you're sitting there with your desires, you want to steal the phone, and then these other systems start blaring these, like, they trip the alarms. Don't do it. You'll feel bad. And that feeling can feel like it's not coming from you. It's certainly not coming from your desires because you want to steal, right? And yet you still have this, you can't steal. No. So are you detecting this moral truth out there? No. It's just another system in your repertoire of psychological systems that's just going off and blaring. It's blaring some alarm bell that isn't reducible to facts about your sort of immediate proximal desires. And so you could experience as though it's coming from the outside, and you get the sense, I guess I do have this realist phenomenology. But this phenomenology is consistent with being an anti-realist. So in a lot of these cases, I don't know. I don't know what philosophers think intuitions are, but to me, they do sound deeply mysterious. They almost sound like a pre-scientific, almost soul-based notion of cogitation, as if we aren't, these like nervous systems, a big old brain and a nervous system that are carrying out various sorts of psychological processes, and that whatever intuitions are, they'd have to be some one or more types of psychological processes that go on in our brains. And it may be very informative to understand what those processes are, how they work, how they function, why they yield the kinds of phenomenology that they appear to yield, how they differ, to what extent they are a product of innate or evolved psychological mechanisms, what degree of cultural learning can shape them. Does everybody have philosophical intuitions? I'm not convinced that they do. So this might be some sort of acquired, some sort of learned capacity. And in that respect, it's not like we're all constantly it's like you keep running into people like, I can see auras, and you have to teach people to not see auras. People have to learn that, or opt into this capacity. And I would guess that you could get a guru or a fake guru to convince people that they could see auras if they spent long enough with them. And I think that this realist phenomenology is very much like that. I think that it's something that people learn to detect. Now, they might be primed for it. So, would it be that hard? So it might be hard to get people to have certain kinds of hallucinations, like hallucinating that they see numbers all over the place. Maybe that's kind of difficult. But would it be as difficult to convince people that there's hidden faces all over? I don't think so, because we already seem to be psychologically predisposed to detect faces even where there's no face present. And so realism might be like that, where it has this it's sort of cognitively attractive as a way of slipping up in our phenomenology. And in that respect, it might be fairly easy to train or induce people to report realist phenomenology, maybe something like the guilt story that I described earlier. And if that's the case, that could be quite interesting from a psychological perspective, but it might also mean that this sense that there are these stance independent moral facts is a kind of this kind of intellectually induced hallucination that realists are having. And unless and until we explore the underlying psychology of realists and non-realists alike, I think it's pretty hard to say, and I don't know why we should privilege or default to how realists are engaging with the world rather than anti-realists. Coffee Smoke says, Lance, you're only 13 minutes in. Yeah, so one of the things about when I review videos is I don't want it to just go through the whole video. The videos are often an impetus for me to provide commentary, and I don't want my video to be 90% playing another video. That's not me contributing something of substance to the video. So my goal here is to find stuff in what people are saying that can prompt a reaction and get me to think about it and say something. And so that's what I'm doing. And so if I don't get through the video, that's fine with me. All right, let's look through some comments. The other thing I like to do is pause after I say stuff for a while and look at what people have to say in the comments. So I don't remember because this was a while ago, 30 something minutes ago. But Julio said, yeah, Moxie C, yes, Richard Brown does think that. And so if you recall, isn't Richard Brown sympathetic to a sort of non-cognitivist realism? And Julio says, yes. So I don't know the details of that. I only had the one discussion with Richard Brown. I've seen him in a couple of videos. He talked to Kane B, and he's talked about, I don't even remember, but it wasn't his metaethical views. All right, what else we got? Patrick says, yeah, I have intuition. Sure, it's when I think I reckon this. No idea how this is supposed to be evidence. Yeah, a lot of times it would just be me reporting my beliefs or what I find myself inclined to believe. I don't know that there's anything distinctive, and I'm not sure if Eric is claiming there's anything distinctive. I don't know, because philosophers just often aren't super duper clear on what they're talking about. It's often presented as though it's obvious and it ought to be obvious, and it's kind of silly to get too nitpicky about it. And I just don't have that attitude. I think that there are a lot of really important questions here about what intuitions are supposed to be and how they're supposed to work and what their nature is and where they come from, what psychological processes are involved, because I think all of that is relevant to their epistemic status. Looking through the comments. Yep, that's about it for now.
Whenever somebody gives you an argument and you're trying to assess whether the argument is a good argument or a bad argument, what you're doing is you're considering the claims and you're considering the entailment relations and you're considering whether they do in fact support the premises or the conclusion that they're said to support. In all those cases, what you're drawing on is the way things seem to you as you consider those things. So that's all I mean by intuition. It's this faculty that we have of considering various things, scenarios, and then asking ourselves whether they have this property. So how do I know, that there are moral properties? Well, just here's a classic example. Think about suppose you see some kids and they have a hold of a cat and they've just, they found a cat in an alley. And now they're going to set it on fire because they're into that.
So is the faculty the ability to make judgments? Like, again, what is this faculty? It's just so... What bothers me about this isn't that we're getting this fleshed out notion and then I have issues with the notion. It's that it's so under-described. It's hard to even know what the capacity, like, what is this faculty? Is it one faculty or are there multiple faculties? Sounds like it's one faculty. So what sorts of judgments does this faculty operate over? Like, what is what are its input and output, like, rules? Like, why is there just no detail here? There's just no detail. I don't know what the system is supposed to be.
And so here they are burning a cat alive. I claim that I can see, if I just think about what that...
See, he says, I claim that I can see. Non-literally? Okay, so if it's non-literal, what are you actually doing then? Because you're not actually seeing that it's wrong. Or is he seeing that it's wrong? He's seeing, like, with eyes? Presumably it's not visual. Okay, so it's not visual. Then what the hell is it? It's quasi-perceptual. Right, that's what it's. So it's a quasi-perceptual fact. Like, if I'm doing math in my head, it's a quasi-perceptual. I don't think so. So why would I think that my moral judgments are quasi-perceptual?
That cat is experiencing and what the justification is that these kids have for setting this cat on fire. I think I can see that that's morally wrong, and I think I can see why it's morally wrong.
So he says, I think I can see that it's morally wrong. Okay, he thinks he can see that. Some people say that they think that they can see auras. Some people say that they think that they can see the future. Some people say that they think that they can hear the voice of God. It's fine to make these sorts of claims. Now, I'm very skeptical of all of those claims. What I would ask someone is, why should I believe that you have this power? Why should I believe it? And I have yet to hear any compelling reasons from ethical intuitionists as to why it's not that I'm simply saying, yeah, maybe you have ethical intuitions, but I don't. No, I'm questioning whether they have ethical intuitions. I'm questioning whether anybody has this faculty. If I say I don't believe people could see auras, I'm not saying, look, maybe you could see auras, but I can't. I'm saying I don't think seeing auras is a capacity that human beings have. I'm not convinced ethical intuitions are a thing at all. If they are, I would need to see an adequate description for them to even be a large enough target for you to land a criticism on them. But if you paint such a vague and underdeveloped target, then there's nothing to latch onto from a critical perspective. It's just, you could say a bunch of stuff that's just vague enough where it sounds like you're saying something substantive when you're not. And I worry that that's what's going on here.
I think I can see that's the kind of, and what I mean by that's the kind of thing that you shouldn't do. You shouldn't do even if you really want to do that. And why not? Well, because.
So he's seeing that you shouldn't do that. How do you see a fact like that? And what is the content of the fact? So you shouldn't do it. What does that mean?
The cat is going to suffer enormously, and the benefit that the kids are going to get is trivial compared to the enormous suffering.
Okay, so here's some facts. Some kids, they want to hurt a cat. The suffering of the cat is greater than the amount of benefit that the children would get from harming the cat. Let's just grant all of that's true and that you have good reason to believe it's true. You're justified in thinking that's true. It seems super plausible to me. Okay, why is the fact that it would cause a bunch of harm to the cat more than the happiness that the children would get from harming the cat? Why is that fact like that's the reason why it's wrong? What does that even mean? I'm not saying I don't think it's true. I'm saying, and just to be clear, I'm against people harming cats for fun. But just to be clear, when someone says that fact explains why or is the reason why it's morally wrong, how is that determined? How do you know that? Again, is it all just because it seems true? It seems true. Seems. Okay, so let's say it seems to you that way, and let's say that that's somehow justified. What if it doesn't seem that way to me? Now what? Now what happens? How do we resolve that?
That the cat experiences. And so there may be many other reasons why it's wrong. Maybe it's disrespectful to the cat. Maybe there's lots of other things going on, but at least, I mean, one pretty clear reason that it's wrong is that it causes enormous suffering for a tiny benefit. And I just think if you're doing that, then that's wrong.
Right. So what if you're a sadist and you want to cause suffering? Wouldn't that make it a reason to cause the suffering? And if not, why not? Again, this has nothing to do with what I approve or disapprove of. Just why wouldn't that be a reason to cause the suffering? Patrick says maybe he should switch to smell for his poetic language. I smell that this is wrong. Yeah, the drawing on the visual stuff, I think, flies under the radar for people. It sounds super plausible, but if you start switching to other sense modalities, maybe feel that it's wrong sounds okay. But I grasp. You could use some sort of kinesthetic type of poetic language, but you smell that it's wrong, or I hear that it's wrong. That sounds real strange, right? This is kind of off topic, but Zachman asks, what do you think of antinatalism? I'm not a proponent of antinatalism. I don't see any particular reason to think that it's morally wrong to have children. Not sure if you have other specific questions. I guess I'm not averse to answering the question. I just don't find arguments for antinatalism persuasive. But that is normative ethics. I don't really do normative ethics, at least not anymore. But I could talk about it, I guess.
How do I know that? Well, consider this. I mean, just consider, is there anything objectionable about causing enormous suffering for no reason at all? Seems to me as clear as anything that it is. And if you're...
See, so this is what's so strange. Like, how does he know it? Well, does it seem objectionable? Well, what do you mean by seeming objectionable? I find it objectionable, but as an anti-realist, like, I object to it. That's the sense in which it's objectionable. But that doesn't get you to it stands independently wrong. It just gets you to I find it objectionable. So it's wrong relative to my standards. How do we get from where is the realism coming into this? Is it supposed to seem stance independently wrong? Is it supposed to seem objectionable independent of whether you found it objectionable? would it still seem objectionable to you if you didn't personally find it objectionable? So, are you supposed to occupy a point of view where you're indifferent to cat suffering, you don't care if someone, and you don't feel personally that it's wrong, but the faculty that's detecting the moral truths is still functioning anyway, and then you're detecting, well, even though I don't feel that it's wrong, I'm still detecting that it is in fact wrong. It is objectionable, even if I don't personally have a subjective it doesn't seem subjectively objectionable, but it stands independently objectionable. I find that really, I don't think people think that way. That sounds really strange. Maybe they do. It's an empirical question. So I'm open to somebody reporting evidence of that. But it seems to me realists are just, they're the moral facts that are independent of their subjective values are suspiciously track what their subjective moral values happen to be. Sounds kind of to me like they're reporting their subjective values. So I think that's what is in fact going on. But who knows? Maybe it's not. I don't actually think it's not. I think that is what's going on. At least for the most part, most of the time. Sometimes realists will say, this is actually inconsistent with my subjective values, but I still think it's wrong. And I think something more complicated might be going on there. It might be similar to the guilt sort of scenario. So imagine a person grows up in, I don't know, a Catholic household, and they're taught that masturbation is evil, 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 evil. And they become an atheist, and they're really secular. And they have a lot of standard sort of secular, let's say, progressive values, but they still have the sense that masturbation is wrong. And that feeling, they could say, look, I don't have any rational reason to think this. It's not consistent with any of my other values. I'm progressive on all these other things, but it just seems wrong. So there could be this persistent sense that something is wrong, even if it doesn't align with your values or goals or interests. But again, I think that could be explained psychologically through causal mechanisms that wouldn't be best accounted for, or best explained in terms of saying that you have a faculty for detecting stance-independent moral truths. So it would just be quirks about how human psychology is. As social organisms, we may have a variety of mechanisms for inducing compliance with social norms that can have a phenomenological vibe to them of being imposed from the outside, this guilt and shame sort of mechanisms. So nothing about those mechanisms to me lends itself towards thinking that they're tracking truths. It just lends itself towards thinking that people are, through various ways, can exert self-imposed pressure to act in ways that might be adaptive to them by conforming to local social conventions, that sort of thing.
You're worried about the process that I just used, which is this sort of rational reflection, just reflecting on the proposition and seeing if it strikes me as true or false. Just note that that's literally what everybody who's investigating anything interesting does. Your math.
No, he's repeatedly said everybody is doing this, and he has presented exactly zero. I mean, one, this is super vague. Two, it's not just vague; it's deeply underdeveloped. So, what is being presented to us? It's unclear what exactly it is. But also, whatever it is, even if we determinately resolved it in one way or another, like we're like, all right, he's talking about a perceptual faculty. He's talking about, no, it's not literal. It's some sort of intellectual faculty. Even then, it's underdescribed, it's underdeveloped. So there's not enough meat here to really know what these processes, like this process or processes are, or how they work, or what they do, or what delineates the content of the judgments that are included in this faculty versus other sorts of faculties because presumably your faculty for like making decisions about what to eat for lunch is not part of this faculty. So that's a different faculty. Okay, well, is that mediated by distinct psychological mechanisms or not? There's like so many questions here. So even if we set aside those questions, I also have yet to hear any reasons why I should think it's true that what he's saying here. Like, why should I think that everyone does this all the time? What has he presented that would prompt me to think that that's true? As far as I could tell, absolutely nothing. He's just asserted that this is the case. And again, if you're doing an interview with somebody, maybe it's fine for them just to assert what their position is. But I don't buy it. Like I don't think that we have this capacity. So okay, so if you can make an assertion and not support it, I could just reject these. I could just say I don't think. I don't think so. Often though, that people that make these sorts of assertions, even if they don't present robust evidence for them or even much evidence at all, often will treat the assertions as I'm not saying Eric is doing this, but they'll treat their particular take on the matters in question as somehow privileged over the skeptic, the person that's like, I don't think so. And think about how weird that would be in a case of somebody that claims to see auras or to talk to God. If someone was skeptical, I think most of us would be like, yeah, that's a reasonable default position to take, is to be skeptical. Why shouldn't we take that position about whatever Eric is talking about here, this faculty of intuitions? I don't see why not.
Your math professor, when they're considering whether some mathematical claims are true or false, whether the proof is correct, they're just considering the claims and assessing whether it strikes them as true, whether.
Again, are they though? So is the claim here that the same psychological processes involved in the judgments of mathematicians are also in play when people make moral judgments? Is that the claim? If so, citation, please. Like, why should I think that that's true?
The premises strike them as plausible, whether the entailment relations seem to be in good shape. That's literally all we're doing. So if you're wondering, like, how do we have epistemic access to these moral truths? It's on the basis of considering these sorts of scenarios, either in real life scenarios or hypothetical scenarios, and sort of reasoning about not only whether the property is there, but why is the property there? What makes it the case that this is right or wrong, good or bad? And we do that with lots of thought experiments and just using our reason and intuition.
Would you consider yourself a reductive physicalism? Like, for instance, can everything in the world be reduced down to its fundamental physical or material basis?
No, I guess I myself reject any sort of reductive physicalism. So I don't have, super subtle views about the nature of the mind, but my guess is that at the end of the day, there's this extra stuff, consciousness, and it's just never going to be reduced to mere physical stuff. Of course, it's going to be our conscious experiences are going to be grounded in physical things. That is, they're in some ways tied to what happens in our brains. But at the end of the day, our conscious experiences are not physical. That is, they're not. If you like I'm experiencing blue right now because there's some blue stuff on my screen. Where is the blue stuff? In one sense, the blue's on my shirt, but where's the experience that I'm having of blue? It's not in any particular location. And if that freaks you out, then I just say, yeah, what you're learning is that reality is weird. And, we just should come to terms with that. And, many people aren't willing to accept that. They want to say, no, that the experience itself is a physical thing somewhere or, similarly with morality, like, no, there can't be these non-natural truths, these truths that are independent of the physical world. But I guess I just think there are, and you're in the grip of a theory. If you're going to deny all these things that seem as clearly true as anything, that we have conscious experiences, that they're not identical to any particular physical relation, they're grounded in physical relations. But so really, if you deny that there are moral truths or epistemic truths about what you ought to believe and ought not to believe, about what supports what, about what counts as a reason for what. I guess I think none of those things are going to be reducible to any physical thing. And to the extent that people are inclined to deny that, it's because they're too zealous to have everything reduced to a particular theory. And I guess I would say they're not being terribly scientific. That is, they're not being as open to the world as they should. You should just take the world as it is and then draw a theory from that, rather than having a theory and then everything that you encounter, you just try to shove into the theory. I think that's not a good way to proceed with inquiry or even science. But that's what a lot of people do. And I have some, speculations about why, but I'll just stop right there.
Oh boy, so much to say about that. I want to take it back to a couple of the remarks that he made earlier. Well, actually, I don't think I need to. No, I will. Sorry, I had to step away for a moment. How far back do we have to go? We got to get back to this part about they're caught in the grip of a theory.
In physical relations, but so really, if you deny that there are moral truths or epistemic truths about what you ought to believe and ought not to believe, about what supports what, about what counts as a reason for what, I guess I think none of those things are going to be reducible to any physical thing. And to the extent that people are inclined to deny that, it's because.
So none of them are reducible to physical things. So we have a very strong metaphysical thesis here. So some sort of anti-physicalist, some sort of non-physicalist view. Okay, so that's a position on the table. And to the extent that people are inclined to deny that, to deny some non-physicalist view, they're too zealous to have everything. Learning is that reality is weird, and we just should come to terms with that. And many people aren't willing to accept that. They want to say, no, that the experience itself is a physical thing somewhere. Note the way he's framing this. So reality is weird. So it's weird in a way that the weirdness is his metaphysical views. And so if you deny that, the tone in which he's characterizing people is it's like people that are like, no, I don't want to accept it. No, like they're in denial. It's a very, because I imagine I was saying it like this, like clearly the world doesn't have these stance independent moral facts, but then there's realists that are like, no, there must be. It's framing your opposition like a bunch of emotionally charged idiots. It's not a very flattering way of depicting the opposition.
Or similarly with morality, like, no, there can't be these non-natural truths, these truths that are independent of the physical world. But I guess I just think
yeah, so I deny that there's these stance independent facts, but I don't think it's because there can't be something independent of the physical world. There's a common thing that a lot of Christian apologists do, which is that they'll say, oh, if you're an atheist, you just think that people are bags of chemicals and just a bunch of cells. So there's often this presumption that if you're an atheist, you're some sort of physicalist or materialist of some kind. Of course, that's not an entailment of atheism. Likewise, it's not an entailment of rejecting non-naturalist moral facts that you are therefore a physicalist or a naturalist, or that you are applying some very specific theory. Yet he ends up making this remark about how you're caught in the grip of a theory.
There are, and you're in the grip of a theory.
Yeah, what grip? So if you disagree with him, you're in the grip of a theory. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, but roughly it's something like, because he makes this point later on about like, okay, so there's the manifest image, so the way the world seems to you. It seems a certain way. You have your phenomenology, you have your experiences, and then you could have a theory that says, okay, it might seem that way, but it's not really that way. And I think he's alluding to something like this, that people that adopt these sort of hardcore reductive physicalist views of the world, even though the world presents itself in a certain way, they override those initial inclinations to believe that. They override those intuitions. They override a belief in those experiences and suppress and reject them. So they start out believing something, and then they have a theory like physicalism, and then, well, it's an entailment of physicalism that there couldn't be these non-natural moral facts. So although it seems like there couldn't be. And so they're in the grip of a theory in an epistemically unvirtuous sense, like this objectionable sense, which is that there are these moral facts, these non-natural moral facts. It seems that there are these non-natural moral facts, but because you are so committed, you're dogmatically committed to this physicalist, naturalist worldview, that as a result of that, you're in denial. You're rejecting these facts that would otherwise and ought otherwise be obvious to you if you weren't stuck believing that theory. I think that's basically what he's getting at.
If you're going to deny all these things that seem as clearly true as anything.
See, that seem as clearly true as anything. Eric, they don't seem as clearly as true as anything to me. And I don't think they seem as clearly true as anything to most people. I think you are the psychologically idiosyncratic one. I don't have these experiences that you report having. I don't have them. I've never had them. It sounds to me like you're reporting what sounds like supernatural powers. I have never had experiences of stance independent moral facts. I don't think that's a thing. And it's not like I experienced it, but I'm going, no, although I have this experience, I think I'm wrong about it. And it's not like, a person can hallucinate and then come to believe, oh no, someone must have slipped me drugs. I'm hallucinating. I'm not really experiencing. You can have a hallucination and like know that you're having it. I'm not reporting that. That's not what my experiences are like. It's not like I'm experiencing the world as if there are stance independent moral facts, but I'm denying this. I don't experience reality this way. And I ended up going into the psychology of metaethics. That's my area of specialization. I specifically, for my dissertation, did research on the question of, do non-philosophers speak, think, or act with an implicit commitment to or an explicit endorsement of moral realism? And the conclusion I came to is, for the most part, no. There's very little evidence of that. Now, do we have definitive evidence one way or another? Of course not. But what we did not find over the past 20 years where this research has really started to take off is overwhelming evidence that people experience the world the way that Eric reports experiencing it. Does that mean they experience the way I do? No. I don't know exactly how they experience the world, but what we don't have is clear positive evidence that some substantial majority of people have realist phenomenology, that they make realist judgments, that they speak, think, or act in ways that are best explained by positing some sort of implicit commitment to realism, or even an explicit one. I doubt hardly anybody has an explicit commitment, but even an implicit one. So it could very well be that as a matter of empirical fact, the way in which Eric Sampson experiences the world is actually psychologically idiosyncratic and unrepresentative of how most people experience reality, morally or otherwise. That's an empirical question. And philosophers are not simply entitled to presume that their experiences reflect any particular proportion of the way other people experience the world. So no, again, what he says here, look at
I just think there are, and you're in the grip of a theory if you're going to deny all these things that seem as clearly true as anything.
You're in the grip of a theory if you're going to deny all these things that seem as clear as anything. Okay, what if it's just not true that they seem as clear as anything? Then we don't need to say that the person has to be in the grip of a theory to deny this. That this whole story just sort of falls apart. And I think that is the case. This isn't speculation. I think that this is what's going on. And this cuts both ways. Why not suggest Eric thinks that there are facts of this kind and that he reports having experiences of this kind because he's in the grip of a theory? Why think that one psychological story is any more compelling or plausible than the other?
That we have conscious experiences, that they're not identical to any particular physical relation. They're grounded in physical relations. But so really, if you
the empirical work, Sitzma and a handful of other people have done research on whether non-philosophers, are responsive to the hard problem of consciousness or have a notion of phenomenal consciousness. The evidence so far does not seem to suggest that they do. Do I buy the evidence? No, I think there's methodological concerns with it. But what it doesn't do is appear to present definitive positive evidence that most people are vulnerable to or susceptible to, like the hard problem, or inclined to think, the sorts of things that would prompt philosophers to think that there are qualia or phenomenal consciousness, especially not in such a way that it's not reducible to physical facts. There's very little evidence that non-philosophers are disposed to think this way at all. So again, philosophers seem to operate under the presumption that the way they think is representative of how people think. And that the way that they think isn't the product of their distinctive and idiosyncratic academic training, which it very well might be. For all we know, the sense that there's qualia is just as much an artifact of the quirky individual experiences that philosophers have as a person that spends a few months in a weird cult with a guru that teaches them to see auras is convinced that they could see auras, and so are all the people around them. I think it's entirely possible philosophical induction can prompt philosophers to effectively have intellectual hallucinations. And I think that might be what's going on here.
You deny that there are moral truths or epistemic truths about what you ought to believe and ought not to believe, about what supports what, about what counts as a reason for what. I guess I think none of those things are going to be reducible to any physical thing. And to the extent that people are inclined to deny that, it's because they're too zealous to have
too zealous. So people that deny moral realism are too zealous. Now, I got to admit, I'm pretty damn zealous. So maybe Eric's got a point with me. But generally speaking, I don't see any particular reason to think that people that deny what moral realists I just think that they're not delivering a good product. I don't think it takes being zealous to deny that. I do think that realists have historically, at least in the past few decades, themselves been extremely zealous. They've done a lot to frame anti-realists as evil, baby-torturing maniacs and psychopaths. I'm not saying Eric has done this, but other realists have done this sort of thing. A lot of them have been quite zealous. And they have constructed a narrative in the field of analytic meta-ethics that often presents anti-realism as being on the dialectical back foot, as being a sort of shameful, naughty position to take that one has to apologize for. And I think anti-realists have mostly gone along for the ride with this, and it's just been a very long time where this has become an entrenched perspective. I think relativism is blasted in intro to ethics courses and treated like some stupid idiot view that only a stupid, evil, idiot, stupid person would have. It's not. Relativism is infinitely more defensible than moral realism. Even like prude and stupid, like appraiser relativism is. And pretty much any non-cognitivism, error theory, they're like every one of them. I reject all of them. They're all light years beyond moral realism. I mean, moral realism is one of the least defensible philosophical positions in all of academic philosophy. And it's 62% of philosophers. I mean, what the heck? And, if I say stuff like this, I get comments, people trying to, but the majority, you're going to deny the majority. How arrogant are you to think that you disagree with the majority? I don't give a shit about those comments. They are absolutely empty, worthless shit. If you think I'm wrong, present arguments for why I'm wrong, because all this posturing about what most people think and what experts think about this or that, a bunch of shit. Whether someone is an expert or not is downstream of the actual quality of their arguments. It's not that they're an expert, so their arguments are good. It's that whether their arguments are good is what makes them an expert. So if I think all their arguments suck, maybe we should ask questions about the degree to which analytic philosophers are actually experts on metaethical questions. Maybe this is not a realm in which we have established standards and criteria where it makes sense to talk about who's an expert or not. Maybe. And in any case, that 62% is just so damn misleading, because naturalist realists, which there's, 31, 32%, they will typically reduce moral facts to some sort of descriptive fact. It has nothing to do with what non-naturalist realists is, certainly not ethical intuitionism. That's not what the Naturalist Project is. This is just not what that project is about. The non-naturalist realists make up 26.6% of the survey respondents to the Phil paper survey. Anti-realists are 26.1%. 0.5% difference. It's not that big of a difference between the people that specifically endorse Eric Sampson's form of realism versus people that endorse a bunch of varieties of anti-realism. You could say, okay, well, that's not a fair comparison. Okay, yeah, it's not a fair comparison. Neither is all realists versus anti-realists. I don't grant, yeah, sure, that's the literature splits it as realists versus anti-realists, but you could split it as Morians versus descriptivists. You could do it that way. I don't see any particularly absurd reason why we would frame things in terms of the descriptivist accounts versus the irreducibly normative accounts, because that's the bigger crux for me. It's a bigger crux for a lot of people, including a lot of non-naturalist realists. Naturalist realism would be pretty much as a loss as anti-realism. There's not that big of a difference, because if the only kinds of moral facts there are facts like, hey, it's an analytic fact that when someone says murder is wrong, that just means the same thing as murder reduces net well-being. Okay, well, that has no normative force. It has no practical authority over us. It's not irrational to ignore it. It has none of the qualities that non-naturalist realists typically want the moral facts to have. They want those facts to have clout, oomph, power over us. And the naturalists can't deliver the goods on that score. At least most of them don't even seem to be trying to. Maybe some would claim that they can, and then they're going to teeter into non-naturalist realism. So this whole 62% thing, so people try all these posturing moves and they just roll right off for me. If that's the best you've got, then I think that's a good sign you don't have much else. So, at least realists like Mike Humer will construct and present arguments, moral convergence, ontological argument, that sort of thing. That's what people should be doing if they're going to argue for realism, is construct a damn argument, not appeal to Phil paper survey results. Ridiculous for people to do that. It's especially funny when I've had people say, nobody really does that. And then I have to get the list of here's 58 people doing it. I've started to gather, I have some quotes now. I didn't have a list before. It's really frustrating when someone's like, who actually says this? And probably people in the chat here have encountered people saying this. So maybe I need a bigger list. What I did start doing in cataloging, I have a few bookmarks saved for people making this sort of Phil papers sorts of claims. So I don't even know where it is. I'll have to dig it up. I got a few of them. But what I have a lot of is normative entanglement. So that's a good one to catalog. So, eventually I'll have if I have hundreds of examples, it'd be hard for people to deny that people are doing it. They'll still deny it anyway, though. Jimothy says, Lance, you have a view on conceptualism. I don't even know what conceptualism is. Yeah, the way Patrick puts it. So when you disagree with me, you're just relying on your zealous mind. When I disagree with you, I'm intuiting. Yeah, the way a lot of realists are going to frame it is that their position is the intuitive one and the anti-realist position isn't. And historically, that is how the discussion has gone, that intuitions are on the side of realists. So if you're going to be an anti-realist, you got to start with, the intuitions are on their side. So I'm going to need some really good, compelling theory that it could stand on its own 2 feet on independent grounds. It's going to say, even though the intuitions favor realism, anti-realism is true anyway. And that is the framing that historically has dominated in the dispute between moral realism and anti-realism. That's what I'm trying to break. So you got Daenerys Targaryen wants to break the wheel in Game of Thrones, I want to break this narrative that that realism is the intuitive common sense position, anti-realism isn't, and so anti-realists are in a position of having to do a lot of work. They have to play dialectical catch up to reach the level that the intuitionists, the Morean realists start at. And I don't think we should buy that narrative. I think that narrative is not true.
To everything reduced to a particular theory. And I guess I would say they're not being terribly scientific. That is, they're not.
I would love to know in what way I'm being unscientific in rejecting non-naturalist moral realism. How is that unscientific? It's unscientific to reject the idea that there are a special type of fact that you have access to using a mysterious faculty that gives you knowledge of truths that are outside the bounds of science. It's unscientific to reject that? No, it's not. Come on. Really? Moxie C is asking me, how much experience do you have with intro to ethics courses? Are you asking me that question? And Patrick says, also, which philosopher is supposed to be considered well-read on the topic? On what topic? Maybe I'm missing context here. Hey, Nitty, what's up? It says evening chat. Sapir says Lance is cooking. Appreciate it. I was cooking earlier. I'm not cooking now. So I did make dinner a little early. This is cute. Coffee Smug says, rare video of Lance talking about meta-ethics. Yeah. I'm actually approaching my 100th video. I wonder what percentage, because when I get 100, I'll have the exact percentage of how many are about meta-ethics. We could take guesses now. What percentage do you think are about meta-ethics? I'm going to say 84%. That's my guess. I don't actually know. I'm not cheating by having added them up. Or am I? I'm an anti-realist, so who knows? Maybe I'm evil. Moxie C says, as I've also pointed out, there are more anti-realists than the Phil Paper survey shows, given how many constructivists and divine command theorists consider themselves realists. Yeah, that's a possibility. It doesn't look like it when you look at that other question, that there's a whole lot of anti-realists that weren't counted in that straightforward question about whether they're anti-realists or not. So I'm not sure there's a whole lot more. I don't know how to you'd have to do some work to really pull out the number. Note that there was, what was it, 16, 17% or something like that said like other. I don't know. Maybe those people don't like the term anti-realism, but more of the, like, what if you split them up? Like they had to go one way or the other. I don't know if more would break towards realism or anti-realism. One moment, everybody. Sorry, everybody. Real life stuff going on.
They're not being as open to the world as they should. You should just take the world as it is and then like draw a theory from that rather than having a theory.
Sure. Okay. I take the world as it is. Doesn't seem like moral realism is true. Seems like anti-realism is true. Done. So, this is the kind of pushback I want to see anti-realists start to give. Just in the chat, I'm just curious, there's going to be huge selection effects here. So this isn't representative of anything. But how many of you have realist intuitions or inclinations and endorse them? So how many of you are realists? In fact, wait, we could do a poll, right? Let's do a poll. One second. I got to figure out how to do polls. I haven't done one in a while. Yeah, start a poll. In fact, okay, cool. I'll just make it really simple. Yeah, simple enough. Okay, there we go. Did I just see keyboard ASMR? Well, okay, let's get caught up on the chat before we continue. Conceptualism is the view that universals exist only as concepts in the mind. We'd probably have to have a conversation for me to have a sense of what I would say about that. Matt Springfield says, did you have a sense of the importance of the default intuitive view argument for realism before you started your research on layperson's intuitions? I don't actually know. There is a paper. Give me one moment. I'll find the paper. I'll turn off the sound so you don't get the keyboard ASMR. One second. Oh, right. So this is an absolutely awesome paper from Neil Sinclair. And let me give the citation for it too, in case you want to find it through whatever means will work for you. So the paper is called Moral Realism, Face Values and Presumptions by Neil Sinclair. Oh, the reference is just, it's not being useful. Where was it published? It's published in Analytic Philosophy, 2012. I'm trying to get a good reference for it. Because the one on Google Scholar is not working. All right, it's just not working. So you'll have to check that out. Again, let me just copy and paste it in here. Why won't Google Scholar? Is that going to work? Man. Yes, that did work. Here it is. So in fact, I'll throw it up on the screen too. Why not? A second. So here it is, Neil Sinclair, Moral Realism, Face Values and Presumptions. Now that came out in 2012. I started my work, I started down the path that I ended up going on around 2012. And I probably recalled, I have some recollection of what was going on. Yeah, someone commented Sampson's face. Let's not leave it on so unflattering. Like, you know, he's mid-gesture. It's not unflattering, but.
And then everything that you encounter, you just try to shove into the theory.
Okay,
I think
a lot of gestures. Okay, there. That's a little better. I'll bring it back to it. Okay, so what was I saying? Right. So basically, there was this exchange, this back and forth between two meta-ethicists, Richard Joyce and Stephen Finlay. So Joyce wrote this paper, Finlay wrote a paper, I think, called The Error in the Error Theory. And then Joyce responded with a paper called The Error in the Error in the Error Theory. And then I think it was Finlay responded with Errors upon Errors. And then Joyce responded, I think it's an unpublished manuscript that's like enough with the errors or something like that, a final reply to Finlay. And so that exchange, I didn't actually read that last one. Maybe it came out later, I didn't look at it. But when I was reading that exchange, I remember the arguments striking me as strange because they were arguing in part about ordinary moral semantics and what people mean when they make claims and that sort of thing. Pretty standard fare. But at some point, it's just struck me like, why couldn't they both be right about some aspects of what people are saying? Why couldn't people sometimes speak like a moral realist or sometimes like an anti-realist? So I came up with this idea. I wrote this paper. It was called the Meta-Ethical Variability Hypothesis. And then shortly thereafter, I came across, I think I hadn't turned the paper in yet. I came across Michael Gill's paper, Indeterminacy and Variability in Meta-Ethics, where he talks about the meta-ethical, I called it the meta-ethical diversity hypothesis. And Gale called his the meta-ethical variability thesis. Gill's is better fleshed out, better argued, better referenced, better historically contextualized in a much more robust way. It was just all around just a better idea. So it was very, very similar. And then I was like, okay, so someone already had this idea. And that paper, I think, came out in 2009, so just a few years before. And Don Loeb, I think it was 2008, had moral incoherentism. And so what happened is, I had this little spark of an idea, and then other people, not too long before that, had better, more fleshed out, more robust versions of a similar idea. So I started running with that, and that's how I got started down the path of because Gill in that paper references like there's been some preliminary empirical research that have been done, and things really picked up. So that the Gill paper came out in 2009, so it would have been written around 2008 or 2009. And 2008 is when the big paper Goodwin and Darley 2008 came out, and that was like the sort of seminal work on getting the ball rolling. So there had been earlier work, 2003, Nichols and Foltz Bennett. There was a little bit of earlier research. I'm not going to get into the whole history of the research, although it would be fun and interesting to do that. Second. So that research at the time was in a very nascent form, and there wasn't very much of it. And since then, I don't know, there's 60, 70 studies now. So it went from like, we had like 4 studies to quite a lot of them now. You had James Beebe, Thomas Pulsar, Jennifer Wright, quite a few other people got involved. Some people did one-off studies here and there. And some people did quite a few studies. So there's like the Beebe and Sakris paper. There's also this cross-cultural paper. Pulsar is another. So there's a bunch. So I got into that stuff, but how much was there a presumption of realism? Like, how much of a salient consideration was that? I don't recall. I don't know when this happened because the Sinclair paper came out right around that time. But my guess is I read the Sinclair paper after. Anyway, that paper deals with this sort of presumption in favor of realism idea and argues against it. So it's a really cool paper. Okay. And Yanzi says, I'll add the sound effects. I'm assuming that's the keyboard. I do have a new keyboard. It should be quieter than the previous one, although probably still. I use mechanical keyboards, so probably super loud. If I use regular keyboards, I break the keys really quickly. I don't know if I press too hard or what it is, but they break in a month or two. I don't think that's normal. So mechanical ones, I get a little more life out of them. At least that used to be how it is. Maybe I don't type so like aggressively as I did in the past. I don't know. Who cares? All right. So Moxie says, like how you know how common it is for intro ethics to treat relativism unfairly outside of your own education. Have you heard of others with similar experiences? I have many times. I've had people describe the intro to ethics materials that they've taught or encountered, and a lot of times it's a lot of like shitting on relativism and treating anti-realism as a ridiculous or stupid view. So quite a few times, and yeah, I've seen it a lot. That's all anecdote and hearsay, so take it with a grain of salt. I don't have any systematic data on how it's treated in intro books, but I'd be willing to bet that it's treated overall fairly unfairly, and if in places unfairly and in other places very poorly, like just inaccurately. So I think we get a good mix of both, probably both at the same time. I'm increasingly convinced that a lot of the objections to anti-realism are based on misconstruals and misunderstandings. But if you're wondering whether it's just my personal experience, no, this is other people reporting things to me. Coffee Smoke says, yeah, that makes sense. Why can't some people's moral judgments be expressions of subjective attitudes and other people's judgments better explained by the realist stuff? They could be, but why should we propose the realist stuff as the best explanation for, let's say, Eric's judgments or Mike Humer's judgments? Why propose that as the best explanation? Yeah, so this is a pretty common one. So Vice here says, my intro to ethics professor dismissed relativism as, quote, crazy because it would mean certain very bad things that happen. I don't know what it does to my channel if I say them out loud. Then moved on. So basically, like the most horrific things that people have ever done to one another. Often people say, yeah, if you're a relativist, then you don't think that's actually bad. And so that's absurd, and they move on. And I've heard this, I've encountered this a lot. Again, a bunch of anecdotes. It's not like I have systematic data on how it's taught, but my general impression is it's often dismissed that way. And Yinzi says, can someone explain why the empirical research is important? Isn't important whether there are moral facts or not? At least some people claim there are. So what's the matter? What does it matter what the folk mean? So it matters in a few respects. One is in a very simple respect in establishing burden of proof. So a lot of realists will appeal to the fact that, like Eric is doing it in this conversation. If I went around saying we experience the world as though there are no stance independent moral facts, we experience it as a world of anti-realism. If someone then comes along and says that there are the moral facts, I could say, okay, well, why should we take that seriously? Make your case. Whereas if someone says, look, we're going to operate on this assumption that we take the world as it seems, unless we have good reason to do otherwise, it seems like realism is true. So we should operate under the assumption that realism is true, unless we have good reason to think otherwise. If that's the way you're approaching things, then whether or not people take it to be true is critical to that argument. So why is it relevant? It's relevant for that reason. You know, there's an implication that anti-realism is radically skeptical, that it's revisionary, that it's absurd, that involves denying what it seems plainly evident to us, which is, you know, something more is very similar to what Eric has already said. That's what I'm denying. I'm denying all of that. So if all of that isn't true, okay, so now what's your case for realism? Because it's not going to be, well, it seems to you that it's true, and you haven't had good reason to give it up. It's not starting as a default position. So basically, any sort of arguments that appeal to a presumption in favor of realism, the empirical evidence is relevant insofar as it undermines those. Indo says, Vice, he's a professor, LOL. What are you responding to? Oh, Jimothy says, damn, I should beat me to it. I wanted to explain it to him. Okay, well, you're welcome to do that in the chat. Okay.
That's not a good way to proceed with inquiry or even science. But that's what a lot of people do. And I have some, speculations about why, but thing that they're not being terribly scientific. That is, they're not being as open to the world as they should. You should just take the world as it is and then draw a theory from that, rather than having a theory and then everything that you encounter, you just try to.
You see, this is what I was describing quite a bit ago. I'm not doing this, and I don't know who he thinks is doing this. I'm not taking a theory. I'm not rejecting the way the world is, taking a theory and then insisting everything has to conform to the theory. I am taking it as it is. Doesn't seem like realism is true.
To shove into the theory. I think that's not a good way to proceed with inquiry.
Yeah, but who is doing this?
Or even science. But that's what a lot of people do. And I have some, speculations about why, but I'll just stop right there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure which way I lean yet, but what I have noticed is in developing neural networks, AI experts have noticed that similar physical structures emerge within the neural networks. You end up getting similar, really complex. One neural network, a little bit of very physical, but were completely arbitrary. How would that even work? Some AI stuff. So this stuff might be interesting. I find that particularly problematic.
Yeah. So you were like, look, if physical stuff sort of underlies our conscious experience, but there's no, it needs to be tied very closely to experiences. Is that the idea? Yeah. So that's a good reason to think there must be, physical, the world is conscious experience. I guess one reason to think about, I'm sort of skeptical of that is because when I just think about, one of the things I'm most acquainted with in the world is conscious experience.
Yeah, so this notion that you're acquainted with conscious experience, like what form? Phenomenal consciousness? Again, I'm skeptical that people are acquainted with it. I've got some other comments here. Has Lance written about Simon Blackburn's quasi-realism? No, I have not. Mr. Pierce says, assume the empirical evidence did show that somehow most people convincingly have realist views. What might you say in that case? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't take that to be, it would be some evidence in favor of realism, but it wouldn't be particularly good evidence. So then I'd have to I'd have to do a lot of work to show most people are radically mistaken about what reality is like. Most people believe in gods. I'm not a theist. So It wouldn't be some sort of decisive blow to anti-realism. Moxie says more people with real. Oh, I forgot all about the poll. Let's see. What happened to the poll? I don't actually see the poll. Where did it go? Okay, we get in the poll. Do you have realist seemings? Do some things seem morally right or wrong independent of desires? So we had 21 votes. And we had 2/3 say no, 1/3 say yes out of 21 votes. Yes, it's interesting. I agree with Moxie. It's more people with realist seemings than I expected. But no, there's quite a lot here that don't have them. So is this an especially psychologically unusual crowd? It certainly could be. It absolutely could be. So I'm not going to suggest that that's not a serious possibility, but maybe it's not. Would a second debate with Sampson, so this is from Matt Springfield, would a second debate with Sampson be productive, or do you think it'd be largely the same as the first? I haven't had a second discussion with like a non-naturalist realist. I don't know how it would go. I think so my position is not especially common, at least certain aspects of it. So a lot of initial discussions is laying out what your positions are. I think if people are already familiar with my position, we might be able to move into some productive territory. So yeah, I think it might go great. I'd be happy to talk to them. Alex says to someone in the audience, I sure think a second talk with Samson would be cool. Yeah, I mean, I could certainly reach out to him, see if he'd be happy to talk. He might not be, and it would be totally understandable if he wasn't interested in having a second conversation. All right, so I'm going to go until 2 hours, so we just got another 15 minutes here, and then I'll wrap things up.
Maybe it's the thing I'm most acquainted with, and when I just think about its nature.
Yeah, so and Yinzi keeps saying stuff like this. Surveys seem irrelevant to the truth of whether they're moral facts or not. I mean, you're saying that, but I gave an explanation of what I thought explained why they would be relevant. And, if you don't agree, fine. But okay, not much else I can do besides that. I mean, I can't have more of a conversation like right now, but I would be happy to talk to you more about it. I do have a Discord. You're welcome to pop in there and talk to me. So it's, I'm not like, I don't like to do that thing. Plus, well, if you don't agree with me, then there's not much more that can be said. It's probably a lot more that can be said. It just, I can't say it now, or at least I don't want to, because, we only got the 15 minutes to go. So you're welcome to pop by and have a conversation about it with me or other people in the server.
Nature, I think.
Oh, and Yinzi says, I was responding to Sapir. Yeah, sorry. I thought you were just commenting on the video again, but you were exchanging with somebody else.
I think, well, first of all, this stuff could, I could have something like these experiences without any sort of physical stuff going on at all. So like when I hear people talk about souls or disembodied minds, I'm not like, wait, what are you talking? I can't even like conceive, like that just couldn't be the case. I think, yeah, I mean,
yeah, I mean, is this a fair characterization of people that don't believe in souls and that sort of stuff? Do they say it couldn't be the case, or just that it's not the case?
I get what you're saying, like where you have all these experiences, but there's no physical stuff. So it's a world of, no physical reality at all, but mental reality. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I totally know what you mean there. That's at least some reason to think that you could have these experiences, but without any sort of physical stuff. I mean, I also just think like, yeah, if you're just like, I mean, look, this isn't going to, if you're a physicalist, you're not going to be convinced by any of this. And I'm well aware of that. But the thought is just this, like here, I'm just sort of trying to articulate a reason to think like, no, once you get a sense of the nature of conscious experience, you'll just see that it can't be identical to any sort of like, purely descriptive thing or purely.
So let's listen to that again.
You get a sense of the nature of conscious experience, you'll just see that
you'll just see. So once you get a sense of its nature, you'll just see. Okay, so I thought about it, and I think I've got a sense of its nature, and I don't just see that it's not reducible to physical stuff. So I'm not saying it is reducible to physical. I'm not even a physicalist, but I certainly don't think it has the sorts of qualities that someone like David Chalmers or substantialists. I don't think it has these like special irreducible or ineffable qualities. Don't think it has those. So I don't have the same. I like it. there's this presumption that if you reason properly, I'm not sure. If you think about it, you'll arrive at the same conclusion as Eric. And like people have thought about it and they haven't arrived at the same conclusion. So this just think about it approach doesn't appear to lead to people converging on the same answer. So I don't know. It doesn't seem like a particularly reliable method.
It can't be identical to any sort of like, purely descriptive thing or pure.
By the way, I hope it's okay to say this, but do like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, if you're liking this kind of content, where I'm an anti-realist and I talk about how much I disagree with moral realism all the time. I don't make a big push to advertise and stuff, but share the video around, do all that stuff. Let's get more, let's make this a thing, let's make it a thing to do this kind of stuff. I've said I'm going to review every single video on moral realism on the internet. And there might be a couple that I don't get to, but I'm eventually going to get to all of them. So, get on board the like super obsessive, cover every single thing, 6,714 different ways. That's what I'm going to do. And probably half of you are going to quit by then because you'll be bored to death, but I'm not going to quit. Actually, it probably would if half of you left, but never mind that. That's in parentheses. I'm not really saying that. So I'm not going to quit. I'll never quit. Yeah. Or something. I don't know. Yeah, so Matt Springfield says, is the Discord server link somewhere? Yeah, I always include a link. Maybe it's not in the description this time, but is it? I'd have to check. Oh, wow, it's actually not this time, but it will be by the time like I finish the video, I'll go at it. So I usually have a link to my link tree, and that takes you to all my other links. So, and that'll include a link to my Discord, like, I don't know, Patreon, my blog, all this different sorts of stuff. So you could go check that out. So yeah, if you're not already aware, I do have a blog also called Lance Independent. So you could check all that out. In fact, I'll drop the link here just for everybody. And let me get that taken care of. There it is. So check that out. All right, well, let's finish up a couple more minutes of this video.
Really physical thing because its nature is just so different. It's sort of in the way that, like, could this cup be the number 7? Could it be? I think most people are not inclined to like wonder, like, oh my God, could it be? They're like, no, it couldn't be. Why not? Because the nature of this cup and the nature of 7 are just so radically distinct that it's just obvious that they couldn't be the same. And so I'm not saying it's just as obvious, the fact that this cup couldn't be the number 7, it's just as obvious that consciousness couldn't be physical. But what I'm saying is something like that once you understand the nature of the things that you're considering, 7 and a cup, you just see they couldn't be the same. What I want to say is once you're like acquainted with the nature of conscious experience, and you're acquainted with what it is for things to be, physical stuff, which I'm pretty acquainted with both of these things, both conscious experience and the nature of physical things, seems to me that they couldn't be identical. Again, look, this is philosophy. At the end of the day, physicalists are going to be like, no, get out of here with all that stuff. But I'm just trying to give you a sense of why I think, I'm not a reductive physical. You asked me if I am. I said no, yeah. And this is, some stuff.
Yeah, look, one of the things I've really enjoyed about some of the talks and podcasts you've done with other people is that you're willing to entertain varieties of points of view and also offer up good reasons to think one way or the other, regardless of whether that's actually your true position. And that's an admirable trait. So thank you. And I appreciate that a lot. Now, look, you describe yourself relatedly in your research as being unified by and as a response to the nagging thought that we might be wrong about everything we think is important. This does remind me of epistemic humility, which I think is very important and is one of my favorite topics. And how would you describe epistemic humility, more to the point?
Yeah, I guess I do think epistemic humility is important. I've written a bit about this.
It does remind me of epistemic humility, which I think a nagging thought. Now, my bad. About every topic.
Important. I've written if you're going to be a good inquirer, you need to be inclined to be overconfident that you've got it right and then sort of settle there. I should say that, realism, according to which there's a truth independent of your mind, sort of encourages a kind of epistemic humility, because it says, look, you don't get to make it up. So you better be doing your inquiry like really well in order to get a grip on what the moral truths are. So I think, realism, realists are often, derided as like the dogmatists, because we think there's a truth out there and like, you better just like conform your mind to it, you piece of crap. And so like, you're a dogmatist. But I tend to think, no, we're the ones who say like, you could be wrong. I could be wrong. We could all be wrong. And so we got to be careful that, not to be wrong. Like we got to inquire well. So yeah, I do think intellectual humility is important. I also think that it's one thing intellectual humility doesn't require is that you just never have any controversial views. So this is a very common view in epistemology. It's a view called conciliationism. And basically what it says is, look, if really smart people disagree with you about something, then you should suspend judgment about whether your view is right. And the reason is because who do you think you are? You think you're smarter than like these people who've, they've gone to all the PhD programs you have, and they've read all the articles, and they held views against you. Like you're a realist, but there's all these smart anti-realists. Who do you think you are believing in realism? You think you're smarter? Like what that encourages is a kind of intellectual cowardice, where you're just never willing to take any intellectual risks. You don't want to put your foot in the wrong place. Like, oh my God, I can't have any false beliefs. I should never, if there's reason to think I might be wrong, I just shouldn't believe anything. I think that's a recipe for that we disagree. It can very often be the case that we're both responding correctly to our evidence. Nobody's making a mistake, but look, reasonable people can disagree about a lot of things. So if you have a view and I have a view and that we disagree, it can very often be the case that we're both responding correctly to our evidence.
So I wonder if Eric would agree that I'm responding correctly to my evidence. Like, am I being reasonable and being an anti-realist?
Nobody's making a mistake. And so we're both rational. So neither of us are making a mistake by believing our views. We're not rationally required to suspend judgment. Okay. That was a big, long way of saying intellectual humility is important. The realist view is sort of fits nicely with a view according to which like you should be careful because you could be wrong about this stuff. So make sure you're aware of your limitations, but that doesn't entail that you always have to suspend judgment. You should never have any moral views. You should never, be a committed capitalist or a committed communist because there's all kinds of controversy about these things. No, I mean, look, you should follow consider the reasons for and against these various views. And if you're convinced that one is correct, in many cases, it's rationally permissible for you to hold these views. And that's consistent with intellectual humility.
Yeah, definitely. And it's great that you brought up intellectual courage as well, epistemic courage. So,
yeah, Coffee Smokes says, to be fair, he has impressive books. Well, to be fair, I have impressive cactuses. So there is that.
Have you got any examples in the real world where you think people have tried to reconcile too much, has taken reconciliation too far?
Yeah, so I mean, there are. So some people have argued that basically you should never hold any controversial moral or political views at all, and that's because there's always going to be disagreement among excellent people. Yeah, and I think skepticism about many moral questions, because many super important moral questions, basically anyone that you can consider, there's really smart people who've argued you either should or shouldn't be doing that thing. For instance, many people want to have kids, but there's lots of people who argue it's morally wrong for you to have kids because their contribution to climate change.
There you go. You got your antinatalism. I hope the antinatalist questioner is happy about that.
It's going to be huge. And so you're a moral dirtbag if you do that. And I mean, have you considered all the arguments against that view? No. So then who are you to go around believing that it's permissible for you to have kids? And similarly, look, for the people who argue that if you think it's morally permissible for you to have kids on the driving, a gas guzzling car, lots of other things. I don't think you have to do that. And I think if you did, you'd be an intellectual coward. That is, you'd be the,
So I guess, is this similar to David Enoch's stance? And has a robust,
doing some harm to the world in order to live a good life. And the same thing is true in the intellectual life.
Mm-hmm. Now, you describe yourself as a robust realist or a non-natural realist. So I guess, is this similar to David Enoch's stance? And how do your views as a robust realist converge or differ from other moral realists or natural realists like Peter Railton?
Yeah, so a robust realist is somebody who thinks that the moral properties are not identical to any natural properties, where natural properties are the kinds of properties that the natural sciences investigate. So a naturalist like Peter Railton, for instance, might say, look, moral goodness is identical to a certain property in the world. I don't think this is Railton's particular view, but there have been utilitarians, for instance, who are naturalists who have this view. Goodness is identical to pleasure. And pleasure is just an experience that somebody could have. It's a totally naturalistic property. Nobody is, or at least is typically thought to be a totally naturalistic property. And so on that view, goodness is just identical to some particular, thing that's going on in the world. Whereas the non-naturalists say, no, goodness isn't identical to pleasure. It's a feature that pleasure has, but it's not the same thing. Pleasure is good. That is, it has the property of being good, but pleasure isn't identical to the good. And similarly, some utilitarians have said, no, rightness just is maximizing utility. And maximizing utility is a totally naturalistic feature of the world. Of all your options, there's one that brings about the most pleasure. And if you took that option, then you did the right thing. And if you failed to take that option, then you didn't do the right thing. So, wrongness just is identical to failing to maximize utility, which is a totally naturalistic property. Whereas the non-naturalists want to say, no, there is a totally naturalistic property, which is failing to maximize utility, but that's not identical to wrongness. It's just that anytime you fail to maximize utility, there's this other that failure to maximize utility has this feature called wrongness, which isn't identical to any naturalistic feature in the world. So what settles this debate? Well, I mean, at least one thing to think if you're a non-naturalist is this: for any property that naturalists say goodness or rightness or wrongness is identical to, it looks like it admits of lots of counterexamples. It looks like you can find things that are good that are not identical to the natural thing that they say it is, or you can find things that are right or wrong that are not identical to the thing that the naturalist says it is. So I think that there are some things that are wrong that are not just failures to maximize utility. So I think that, sometimes, I think rape is wrong. And it's not just because the rapist didn't enjoy it enough. It's not as though it would have been right if it had maximized utility. Like if the rapist had really enjoyed it, then it would have been right. No, that's not what's wrong about rape. It's that it uses someone, like Kant's view is that it uses someone as a mere means. I think something about it disrespecting another person is part of the explanation. But in any case, that's a case where, if a naturalist says to me, rightness is just a failure to maximize utility, I always want to say, no, I can find instances of wrongness that are not identical to failures to maximize utility. And so I just don't find any particular identification of rightness, wrongness, goodness, badness with a natural property very plausible at all. So maybe I'll just end there.
It's worth emphasizing, I just drew attention a little bit ago to how different naturalism and non-naturalism about moral realism are, and Eric is doing the same. And so, I have a blog post where I talk about this being more like a case of rock, paper, scissors between naturalist realists, non-naturalist realists, and anti-realists. It's closer to rock, paper, scissors than it is to there being realists versus anti-realists. Coffee Smug says, was David Enoch the normative web guy? No, the guy that wrote the normative web was Terence Cuneo. Can't remember the title of Enoch's book. Probably has more than one book, but there's a specific one, and I just don't recall the title.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Peter Singer, who's a very well-known utilitarian, I think he started off as a non-realist. He was an anti-moral realist. However, he is...
Yeah, is that it? Taking morality seriously? Let's do a quick check. That sounds right. Taking morality seriously, yeah. A defense of robust realism. That's Enoch. I gotta wrap it up here, so let's see what he says about Singer, and then we'll move on.
Walked the floor over time, and he's been convinced to wave the flag of the moral realist. So he's a consequentialist. Would you consider yourself?
I don't know if you know, but I did review that Peter Singer, the video where he talks about becoming a realist. I was pretty critical of him. Yeah.
Leaning towards any form of consequentialism, even if you're not a classic utilitarian that is measuring only.
This is a good place to stop. I don't know why he would think Eric is a consequentialist. I'm pretty sure Eric's is just like, no, I'm not. So let's get
the hedonic scale lever consider.
For many reasons. I mean, one is
pain and the philosophic calculus.
Yeah, so I'm not a consequentialist for many reasons. I mean, one is just that, well, yeah. So, I mean, I think there are just many cases that intuitively show that consequentialism is false. I mean, here's just one like that I think is, you know, not just the short term and no to good, you know, consequence. You never know in class, like go through. But the point is like, that's why I reject consequentialism. Instead, I don't have a systematic view. And a lot of people find that disappointing. You're an ethics guy. You don't have a systematic view. I think, no, I don't. And the reason is because I think it would be a mistake to take some really, really complicated reality like moral reality and just say, look, it can all be distilled in one principle. I think that's a huge mistake. You can't do that with like, say, football or soccer, whatever you guys call it. I mean,
I'm not sure this is a great analogy. I mean, I see where he's coming from. I think it's a useful example for illustrating the idea, but I'm not sure it's so clear that there's like a mistake being made here. So I think his way of explaining this is very clear and straightforward, and I don't personally disagree, but I'm just not sure how much the analogy would hold up to scrutiny from someone that has this kind of a reductive view of what morality is all about.
Like if somebody asks you like, what's the one principle for how to play football or soccer? Most football players would say, what are you talking about? Like there's so many considerations that are important when you're, you know, playing soccer, when you're cooking meals. What's the one principle you should follow to cook a good meal? There's not one principle. There's a million considerations, and it can't be distilled into a single principle. And I think, you know, economics, like why can't economists like predict the future of the economy? Like, why do they react to the prediction? So it's just silly because the reality that you're trying to find reasons for and against various things, but there's not going to be anything like a systematic theory
of indirect normativity
that accurately describes.
Let's see what this last question is. We'll pick it up from there next time. Or, well, next time I might turn to the Alex and Sam Harris, but I'll finish up this video. It looks like I actually got through, not quite half of it.
What you morally ought to do and ought not to do.
Oh, well, almost there.
Mm-hmm. And this may tie in and may even support the idea of indirect normativity as a means of trying to get AI to not necessarily of AI safety a little. Well, setting the stage for why people should favor moral realism at this point in. All right. Well, setting the stage for why people should favor moral realism over other ethical stances, what does moral realism solve or make simpler to solve?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Okay, so I'm going to wrap that up there. Let's see if there's anything to cover in the chat. Not really seeing much of anything. Yeah, okay, that's about it. Any last comments or questions before I head out? I didn't forget about the AMA. I know I put that on the back burner. It takes a lot more work within these streams. So I have to go through the questions one by one and do that K and V stuff. Turns out it's really hard to do. So that's what I was doing now. All right, I guess nobody has any further stuff. So, all right, everybody, leave comments. I love the comments. Try to get engaged with those. You know, share the video, like the video, subscribe to the video, do all the stuff. I'll catch y'all later. See ya.